Europa Universalis 5, a game where you stare at a map for hours on end and feel a strange sense of satisfaction as you slowly dye the world in your preferred hue. Welcome to Paradox Interactive's latest installment of its premier grand strategy franchise, where players of all stripes get to test their mettle in the ultimate spreadsheet simulator. I've actually been a fan of Paradox strategy games for quite some time, but I only recently was able to dive into their newest title. So far, I've clocked in about 24.5 hours, most of which were spent wrestling with the tutorial missions and trying to figure out the user interface. But now, armed with the shaky grasp of the fundamentals, it's time for me to go achievement hunting. That means turning on the single file Iron Man mode to prevent any save scumming shenanigans in my campaign. I scroll to the bottom of the Steam list and see that the Lion of the North achievement appears to be pretty rare, and you know what, I'm a big fan of IKEA, so I guess it's time to brush up on my Swedish. I start a fresh campaign and take a look at the unique bonuses Sweden gets, and I'm already liking what I see, especially the early game military buffs. Those are going to come in very handy when I inevitably have to go toe to toe with my salmon colored foe to the west.
Hello.
Sweden might look massive on the map, but this is kind of a disadvantage in the early game since it means that a decent chunk of my population is spread out across provinces that I don't have much control over. This means that I have a smaller pool of peasant levies I can summon as cannon fodder. The good news is that I begin the game with a personal union over Norway, which means they'll help defend my territory and with a little persuasion eventually join me in offensive wars as well. But the internal situation of my kingdom is arguably more pressing than geopolitics, and I've got a lot going against me on this front. My ruler, King Magnus IV, has some of the worst stats you will ever see, with even the game giving me a pop-up notifying me that he is in fact incompetent. My king's fat nose and small brain makes the early game even more brutal, as it slows down the effectiveness of my cabinet actions, which normally are the buttons that I press to help the country grow. But doomer posting will not make IKEA the great power that it deserves to be. I first gotta jumpstart my economic engine and start building things if I want to get anywhere. Sweden actually has plenty of iron and wood deposits that are close by to the market capital of Stockholm, meaning that I can efficiently exploit these raw resources and have them shipped over to my urban center to manufacture cooler stuff like tools and furniture, the IKEA special. As I slowly build up the country to become a market leader in budget-friendly furniture, I'm greeted with a real estate transaction regarding the purchase of land from Denmark to my vassal Scania. This purchase is going to put me into debt for some time, but I felt that it was strategically smart to deny the Danes any coastal territory that they can use as a staging ground for their armies when we inevitably clash. Also, a stronger Scania gives me more money, so it offsets the loan repayment slightly. Anyways, the Age of Renaissance begins in 1342, which is a bit early considering the Black Death had not yet devastated my lands. But that does not deter me from picking up the military-focused tech tree. The military category for the Second Age, I think, is quite good for most countries, as it makes your peasant hordes better for the early game conquests. I did do a little bit of research on what I have to do in order to get the Line of the North achievement. I'll have to participate in the War of Religion situation, which kicks off within the Holy Roman Empire. The HRE, it's easier to say acronym, is made up of primarily German territory, and if I want Sweden to worm its way into this organization, I'm gonna have to bust my way through Denmark and into northern Germany, where I then have to move my capital from Stockholm into conquered imperial lands to officially become a part of the HRE. So long story short, I'm going to need my levies to be as ferocious as possible if I'm ever going to bust through the Danish choke point and make my way into greener German pastures. Also, I now realize that the War of Religions takes place in the year 1590, which is a lot farther into the game than I ever played in the tutorial, so this campaign might take me some time as I figure stuff out on the fly. But the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry as I come face to face with the good old Black Death. This is the plague that famously wiped out half of Europe's medieval population, and it certainly did not spare poor Magnus IV of House Bjalbo. I suppose it's a blessing in disguise though to be rid of this crappy king, but I am now saddled with a regency until the 5-year-old Prince Birger hits his growth spurt, which will tank my legitimacy for over a decade. However, I would say that my lack of authority is the least of my troubles, as the Swedish populace takes a tumble.
Ooh, that's bad.
Before the Black Death, my people numbered over 800,000, but now the Swedes are dropping like flies, as tens of thousands perish each month. About a quarter of my population evaporates, and unsurprisingly, this really hurts my economy. But my vermin-afflicted nation eventually comes out on the other end more or less intact, and the Swedish prince finally takes the crown. King Birger III is honestly not that good, but still a great improvement over Magnus. In the pop-up window, there's this piece of flavor text that says our country apparently mourns the loss of King Magnus. Well, I certainly don't. Even as my country slowly crawls out of the wreckage of the Black Death, my brand new Burger King is already running into some family issues. More specifically, the queen has been less than helpful, as the daughters she gave birth to are now very dead. It seems that they lost a hard-fought battle against the common flu, which means my heir is going to be my 38-year-old sister, Catherine, who also has no children of her own. This means that my main dynasty is going to die out in a generation if the Burger King doesn't get busy. I blame Magnus and his beady little eyes for cursing me with such a disastrous lineage. Desperate times calls for desperate measures. I dial up the Pope to request a divorce and free the king up for a new partner. Unfortunately, there appears to be a striking lack of candidates willing to marry the Swedish king. I guess they just don't appreciate the royal shootbullars from IKEA.
English beer, the Swedish meatball.
So I resort to marrying a lowborn, which negatively impacts my legitimacy and prestige. But on the bright side, the new consort knows how to get the job done, and in 2 years' time, a son is born, whom I aptly name Crown Prince My Only Hope. After all of my early game troubles, I think I've finally piloted my kingdom into a respectable state. I'm making 22 ducats per month, my population is almost back to pre-Black Death levels, and I'm almost done diplo-annexing Scania. I've also been colonizing the northern parts of Scandinavia, which will create a land bridge that connects the Swedish heartlands with the eastern Finnish part of my kingdom. After shoring up the domestic front, it's probably about time for me to unleash my imperialistic urges. I see that Denmark is getting bogged down in wars against the German princes of the Holy Roman Empire, wiping out over a third of their levies. This is the opportunity that I've been waiting for, and now is the moment of truth.
Oh boy, here I go killing again.
I have no casus belli, which means declaring war on Denmark will tank my stability, and also generate more war exhaustion. But it's a small price to pay for a shot at permanently altering the balance of power in Scandinavia and opening up a pathway for me to get into the HRE. In this world, might makes right, so I sound the trumpets of war and begin raising both my army levies and my naval levies, which are a bunch of fishing boats that can only be used to shuttle around my troops. My first move is to quickly cross the strait that separates Scania from the capital island of Denmark, as I desperately want to prevent the Danes from securing a defensive choke point that could turn the tides in their favor. Now that I've got some units in Zealand, I begin to spread out and siege down their holdings, which I've noticed is a bit trickier in EU5 than in older Paradox games that I'm familiar with, such as Crusader Kings 2, since forts like the one in Denmark's capital of Copenhagen take a long time to break without any artillery, but also these castles project outwards a zone of control on all adjacent locations that stops my units from bypassing them and going to the next province. This is why I summon some fishing boats, as these naval transport units allow my troops to escape from their zone of control and start island hopping. However, before my levies get the chance to stomp on some new farmland, the Danish army arrives in force. They barrel through the fog of war and begin to cross over to Vordingborg, where my ragtag band of peasants were trying to peacefully occupy some land. There's a giant red circle that indicates my much smaller army is about to get pummeled, so I try to send in some reinforcements, but the battle is decided before any make it. Fortunately, we actually won that fight because I guess the negative penalties for crossing the strait was just too much for the Danes. The forts in EU5 undoes the occupation of any territory within its zone of control if they themselves are not under siege. So I split off a small contingent and send in the bulk of my army to mop up the Danish defenders. Alongside my friends, we overwhelmed the enemy lines with our superior mass of unwashed peasants. But unfortunately, my farmers with pitchforks are not that much better than the Danes, and we actually end up losing roughly the same amount of troops in this seemingly one-sided affair. Though on the bright side, the Danish were forced to flee, which gives me the space to start spreading my levies out like butter on toast. But my joy quickly evaporates as I see that there is a pretty nasty stack of hostile soldiers waiting for me on the next Danish island. I realize that the Teutonic Order and Livonia have decided to enter the fray to stop the IKEA takeover. I link up with the Norwegians and make a push to crush the coalition of Lego lovers once and for all. This time, I was able to score a cleaner hit, killing 5,000 of their men and only losing 4,000 of my own. A great deal by my calculations. The pace of the war is now picking up speed as I begin to plow through the unfortified local capitals of each province. As long as I occupy the location that has a flag and silver icon, the other locations within that province will automatically flip to my control, making short work of Denmark's soft western half. I finally spotted the remnants of Denmark's coalition forces, numbering a measly 6,000 men. I chased the hostile army up and down Denmark, slowly chipping away at their troops with each victory, while also fully occupying Denmark's core provinces. By the time my army reached northern Germany, the Danes had 0 soldiers remaining. It was just Livonia left in the fight. But not really, because I don't see any enemy armies anywhere on the map. Now all I have to do is sit back and watch as my armies spin the blue circle of medieval sieging, slowly chewing through the last forts that prevent me from occupying all of Denmark's remaining holdings. I noticed that Denmark has acquired quite a lot of prime real estate from the Holy Roman Empire, including cities like Liebeck or Bluebeck, which is fantastic for someone like me. Copenhagen finally falls after an excruciating 723 days of my peasants eating all of their food. With Denmark's capital in my pocket, I think it's about time to start locking in my gains and think about what kind of peace deal I want to impose. Unfortunately, Denmark is too big for me to outright vassalize, so I'll settle for dismemberment. I take the 2 island provinces that are detached from the rest of Europe, as that makes future invasions a bit easier, and also these new borders deprive the Danes of their economic engine, including the capital of Copenhagen. But, perhaps more importantly for my purposes, is taking over the province of Lübeck. This territory was originally a free city of the Holy Roman Empire, which means that these lands are still considered a part of the HRE. This is my golden ticket into the organization. If I make the city of Lübeck my new capital, I will automatically become an imperial prince, and then I can participate in all of the fun sectarian violence in the Age of Reformation. Another great thing about taking Lübeck is that it's a market capital and a coastal city, just like Stockholm. So even if I shift my political center to northern Germany, I can still have a decent amount of control over my Scandinavian lands along the Swedish coastline once I build up my navy. So that's my general strategy moving forwards, but in the meantime, I've got a bunch of new lands to Swedify. In preparation for future land grabs, I finished annexing Scania into Sweden. This directly connects my kingdom with the newly conquered Danish lands, and also gives me direct control over the Lund market. Now I have 3 market capitals under my direct control, which should, over time, start printing money for me so that I can feed the ever-growing Swedish war machine. But I don't really have much time to spare as I watch vultures feast on the decaying husk of Denmark, and I decide to go in for seconds myself. This time I've got a humiliate rival casus belli, meaning it doesn't cost me any stability, but I can't really grab any new land. Instead, I'll just kick them while they're down, while also robbing them of their cash to ramp up my domestic industries even faster. More home improvement tools and more IKEA furniture means bigger GDP. Although now it seems that the downfall of Denmark is progressing a lot faster than I expected, as a bunch of weaker German states are now dogpiling on the Danes and have liberated tiny statelets from Denmark's old conquests. But these new countries were born in the wrong era, as I see nothing but freebies to subjugate into my growing sphere of influence.
Fluffy!
The year is now 1425, and my kingdom is looking better than ever. I think it's time to end Danish independence. And this time, I'm backed up by the Swedish parliament. I sacrifice some legislative support in exchange for the Riksdag approving a legitimate casus belli that doesn't have any war score penalties for subjugation. Within a few months, the feeble Danes are getting run down by my hordes of uneducated Swedish peasants, giving me free rein to totally occupy the rump state. This time, I'm vassalizing what remains of Denmark, turning them a nice shade of blue. After consolidating my Danish gains, the pathway into Germany is now cleared of obstacles. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet from here on out, as there are tons of very weak German states within the Holy Roman Empire that are ripe for the Swedish chef to grab. Mecklenburg will be the first imperial prince to taste Swedish steel.
Bork, bork, bork.
Just like Denmark, they fell within months of my meatball-fueled onslaught, but all these other weak neighboring states are just begging to be conquered. I send in my professional soldiers to snuff out Schwerin, a former Danish holding. At this point, I'm swimming in free real estate, but it's going to take some time for me to wipe out the local cultures, so I'll focus solely on integrating beachside property into my empire, and give the rest to my new buddy Mecklenburg. Lübeck is now 92% Swedish, with over 40,000 people living in that city, which is not bad at all. It's almost ready to become my new capital, but I first need to build up the tax value of both Lübeck and the surrounding locations, so that my economy won't get blasted to smithereens once I lose a bit of tax revenue from my old economic hub back in Stockholm. Also, I realize that I can force my subjects to become Swedish by enforcing my culture upon them. It makes them disloyal for a period of time, but being able to export my culture on an international scale makes it a lot easier for me to sell my IKEA plush toys, and then later comes the annexation. Speaking about annexation, I think it's about time for me to cleanse the Orthodox heretics to my east. One of the reasons why I feel the urge to stomp on the throat of Novgorod is because they actually have this weird colonization treaty with Sweden that prevents me from colonizing the eastern side of Scandinavia, and that's just unprofitable. I thoroughly overmatched the Novgorodians, but the main problem is the brutal winter conditions that are found here and the limited supply capacity. This means that my bigger and slower army is going to suffer massive attrition from the severe winter storms and face a bit of starvation here and there.
But it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
But even as my men freeze and starve to death, the strategic value of being able to establish a presence on the eastern flank of Europe is immense. I take the province of Estonia alongside a bunch of Scandinavian territory in my victory against Veliki Novgorod. Estonia can now serve as a nice staging ground to either push deeper into Orthodox lands or to turn my gaze towards swallowing what is left of the Livonian and Teutonic Order. It also acts as an additional coastal territory to secure my maritime presence in the eastern Baltic Sea.
That's pretty cool.
As my grand strategy is starting to take shape, I finally get the chance to make a move to a town that's right for me. The city of Lübeck is now where the Swedish court plots its schemes of giving IKEA a monopoly on ready-to-assemble furniture. This change in venue also gives me a free ride into the Holy Roman Empire, setting Sweden up to be a major player in the coming clash between European powers. Although unfortunately, the consequences of changing the political linchpin of my empire will have some rather dire short-term consequences on my monthly cash flow. At this point, the Holy Roman Empire is dominated by Bohemia, which I would normally be cool with since I am allies with them, but for some strange reason, the Bohemians have converted back to Catholicism even though they won the Hussite Wars. I initially aligned myself with the Czechs because I thought that they would continue being Hussite and therefore join the Protestant side, but it seems I am now on a collision course with one of the most powerful nations in EU5. In preparation for the war of religion situation, I try to take as many high-value assets as Swedishly possible before my fated showdown with the Catholics, even as I battle against the deprecated stonks of my economy in transition. Big cities like Hamburg are top-tier targets that I need under my thumb, because not only are they filled with juicy pops for me to tax into oblivion, they also allow me to stack armories. Being able to spam out manpower production buildings that swell the ranks of my standing army with fresh meat every month will be incredibly important once I launch my nation into a bloody quagmire against the Catholic League. But even as my expansionist instincts are telling me to gobble up more valuable land, I'm starting to run into some real constraints. Chief among them is the fact that Central Europe is being squeezed by two great powers. The baguette-devouring blue blob of France to the west, and the beer-guzzling yellow lump of Bohemia to the east. I would get flattened by either one, which means that I need to act quickly before they encircle me with their ever-growing empires. So I call dibs on Brunswick before swiftly kicking them in the nuts and turning them into a Swedish vassal state. As I sucked the marrow from the bones of the Teutonic and Livonian orders, I suddenly got a pop-up that said I've been elected as the new emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. This was a bit of a surprise for me since I was not really focused on improving the opinions of the electors, but I guess the cultural icon of IKEA was all that was needed to convince the other electors to put Sweden on the imperial throne. Being emperor comes with some nice perks, like getting an additional cabinet slot, which helps me integrate all of this new land that I'm acquiring. And also, it massively inflates my great power score, from a mediocre number 33 all the way to the 5th strongest nation on Earth. Although, the good times will not last, I'm afraid, as the end times approaches. The Catholic Church trembles as the arch-heretic Martin Luther Not King pops into existence. In this timeline, he begins to spread the Lutheran Reformation from Bohemia, which is right next to my country. It only takes 1 year for Martin Luther's ideas to reach Sweden, as a special event pops up that tells me that I can convert to Lutheranism right now, and also make a quick buck by seizing the Catholic Church's assets. I'll probably suffer from religious unity problems, but for now, the big advantage I get from being the first Protestant nation on the map is that I can use the Cleanse Heresy Casus Belli on all of my neighbors, making it much easier for me to plot my future invasions. Also, I'm making big bucks now because I get to tax the Protestant pastors that have replaced the Catholic clergy estate, on top of the 5% bonus to tax efficiency for having Lutheranism as my primary religion. It does mean that I get kicked out from being the emperor of the HRE because only Catholics get to do that, and I get pushed down a flight of stairs in terms of my power rankings. It also has some weird side effects on my population's literacy rates because in EU5, when a pop converts, it's treated as a new entity, which means all of their stats are reset, including their literacy levels, which screws over my research progress. But you know what? I don't really care if my people are illiterate, as long as my stonks are going to the moon, which they are. As I continue to spread the good word of Martin Luther Not King, I get another pop-up that gives me a free Casus Belli to go retake the renegade island of Gotland. The Victual brothers gained independence over a century ago because of some special event, but I suppose what goes around comes around, and I send in my standing army to snuff them out and bring them back into the fold as a vassal state. Gotland isn't really that valuable to me right now, but what is valuable is conquering the city of Riga, which will become the 4th market capital under my direct control. As I cut down the Teutonic Knights and Livonians, my calendar is replaced and the Age of Reformation begins.
This is where the fun begins.
The 4th age of EU5 is the most consequential for Sweden, as this is when we get our iconic yellow and blue flag, the colors of IKEA flapping proudly in the wind. The Age of Reformation is probably also going to be the decisive chapter in this long and arduous campaign, so I focus on unlocking as much military tech as I can to beef up my armies, although no amount of military might will stop my country from shooting itself in the foot due to religious strife. I guess things were going a little bit too well, and the game decides to subtract 50 stability from my already negative balance, because the Catholics are not too happy about all that Reformation stuff. But even as Sweden teeters ever closer to civil war, that will not stop my grand strategic vision of encircling the entirety of the Baltic Sea. I finish the job in Livonia and take their capital of Riga, while also feeding Mecklenburg a bunch of new coastal locations that will leave me with total naval dominance over my own backyard. This essentially gives me uncontested maritime presence across the Baltics, and allows my navy to rapidly deploy forces to any part of the empire if the need arises.
Oh yeah.
It's all coming together.
As I continue to steamroll across Northern Europe, it's time to consolidate my Scandinavian assets, specifically Norway. After more than a century of unification progress, I finally diplomatically annexed my junior union member, instantly integrating all these new lands as core territory since the Norwegians are already an accepted culture within Sweden. I zoom out to appreciate how beautiful my kingdom looks now that I've almost finished absorbing most of Scandinavia, making Sweden look very big and very blue on the map. I also noticed that Livonia seems to have given up some of its lands to the Papal States. Probably because Rome got swallowed up by Naples, and now there's this weak Italian enclave that's holding some juicy coastlines. Even better is the fact that the severely degraded Teutonic Order is going to jump onto my dinner plate like a buy one get one free.
Get one free? Wow!
I slam down the cleanse heresy casus belli and quickly stomp on these bozos. The most important locations that I want direct control over was the island province of Rotalia, and then I can shove the rest onto Mecklenburg's lap so that I don't have to deal with it. The reason Rotalia is important is because it allows me to link up the Gulf of Riga with the rest of the East Baltic Sea, making it easier for my navy to project maritime presence into the Riga market, making my Livonian territory more taxable and profitable.
It's just good business.
Fast forward a few decades, and the year is finally 1590. Over 2 centuries of preparations have led me to this point in history. The Holy Roman Empire is in turmoil, with religious divisions between the imperial princes growing too stark to be reconciled. The War of Religions has finally begun. It comes at an opportune time for me, as I am currently embroiled in a fairly substantial conflict against my former ally of Bohemia, the Emperor of the HRE. The reason why this is so good is because Bohemia is now the definitive leader of the Catholic League, my arch nemesis in the War of Religions situation. As the only consequential Lutheran country, I automatically become the head of the rival Protestant Union. This makes me happy because now I have control over when the biggest war that this version of Europe has ever seen will kick off. But it also makes me sad because the strongest Protestant country in the world is only ranked number 20 in great power score, so most of my religious brethren will be utterly useless. This is why betraying Bohemia in exchange for getting France as my ally will be the key to the upcoming great power struggle. Even though France is a Catholic kingdom, they are deeply hostile to Bohemia and vice versa. The greedy French are on the prowl for new territory, while the Bohemian Emperor is trying to defend what remains of the Holy Roman Empire. This dynamic usually drags these two great powers into direct conflict with one another, which is greatly appreciated by me since I get to hide behind my fellow blue blob while also participating in slowly chipping away at Bohemian might before the real battle between the Protestant Union and Catholic League begins. Unfortunately, my first attempt at destabilizing the Bohemians did not really pan out, as France decided to randomly peace out Bohemia, and for all my troubles, I got 2 measly locations. With Bohemia losing a grand total of 5 locations, I would say that my initial foray has been about as useful as a chocolate teapot.
Oh man!
Well, at the very least, it was a good way to pass the time until I built up enough religious influence to finally unlock the final Lutheran aspect. The Protestant faiths in EU5 have a buffet list of different perks that you can mix and match to squeeze as much value as you can from being a heretic. The aspects that I chose are individual creeds to boost my ability to get as many core provinces as possible, translated Bibles to help me catch up on tech progression since my literacy rate is in the dumpster, and finally, parish registers so that I can tax those Swedish peasants even harder to expand my ever-growing regular army. I also get a nifty little Steam achievement for unlocking all 3 Lutheran aspects. But back on the killing fields of Europe, I quickly find myself in another war with Bohemia right after the last one. I guess the great thing about being in an alliance with France is that they keep pulling me into battles with Bohemia without me having to waste time trying to create a bunch of casus belli. This time, I carve out a separate peace deal before France has a chance to screw me over again, and I'm able to put a slightly bigger dent in Bohemia's holdings in northern Germany. Despite my best efforts in trying to weaken the Goliath that is Bohemia, it's become painfully obvious that I am just nibbling at their toes. So a change in tack is needed. I work towards expanding the Protestant Union and start spamming out recruitment pamphlets to any imperial prince that wants to stick it to the Bohemian Emperor.
You're my friends now. We're having soft tacos later.
But if I'm being honest, my heretical allies within the Holy Roman Empire are going to be nothing but speed bumps for the Czechs to run over. If I want to stand a fighting chance against Bohemia's coalition of Catholic behemoths, I'm going to have to start getting a little more creative. So it's time for me to go back to the printing presses and start handing out IKEA family discounts to the other side of the Christian schism, the Orthodox nations to our east. Sure enough, my Swedish charm offensive pays off, and now I've earned some new alliances with the Slavic countries of Kiev and Smolensk. They're not nearly as strong as Bohemia's friends, but opening up a second front on the eastern edge of Europe will be very handy in splitting up the Catholic League's forces. We're going to be up against some genuine geopolitical heavyweights, such as Great Britain, Naples, and Castile, all Bohemian allies in the fight that is about to erupt. So I'm going to have to pull out every trick in the book. I maliciously cash in on all of those favors that Bohemia owes me from back when we were pals. I stole their land and now I've stolen their fortune. A whopping 5,000 ducats land on my lap, and all that free money is going straight into the pockets of bloodthirsty Swedes, ready to set the old world on fire. The year is now 1601. After being forced to wait a decade for the situation to ferment, I can finally see the light of a new dawn cresting over the horizon. I gather the soldiers of the Protestant Union to start preparing for Armageddon. I now possess the religious supremacy casus belli that will give me the chance to crush the Catholic League and decisively end the war of religions. I've escalated my military as hard as I can, and now comes the moment that will decide the fate of Europe. Every major European power and their empires are going to get involved, with many of them throwing their lot in with the Catholic League. A smarter man might have figured out a way to break up Bohemia's alliances before launching a full-scale war. But I really want to wrap up this campaign, so it's time to put it all on the line. The declaration of war is fired off. There is no turning back now.
Here we go!
My standing armies pour across our shared border and instantly begin sieging down the fortresses that block my path, while my Swedish levies begin to amass back in Lubeck. I can definitely tell that this is the endgame because my campaign is turning into a PowerPoint presentation, with my frame rate feeling like it's been submerged in lingonberry jam. But that does not deter me in my quest to declare religious supremacy over the Catholic League. The fog of war is quite oppressive when fighting across huge swaths of land, as you never know when a death blob might pop out from the shadows. I quickly intercepted a force of 27,000 Bohemian levies with 18,000 regulars, and was able to kill off about 9,000 of them while only losing 2,000 of my own. But unfortunately, I cannot chase after the routed armies of Bohemia, as they have layers upon layers of forts that stop my armies at the outskirts of their empire, which means my enemies will always be able to regroup and regenerate their fighting strength. As the war rages on, more and more nations decide to jump into the fray. Even old foes like Novgorod decide to join my side, even though I was the one that ruined their country. But regardless of our past differences, it looks like most of the Orthodox nations are joining the side of the Protestant Union. It seems my IKEA discounts really did do wonders.
I'm putting together a team.
However, even as reinforcements arrive, my main backer France seems to be more interested in taking a bite out of the Iberian Peninsula than helping me fight Bohemia and Naples. A massive pitched battle breaks out south of Brandenburg, with my forces engaged in a bloody slog against 65,000 Catholics. That one battle results in almost 50,000 men losing their lives. While my foes did get the short end of the stick, it was still a Pyrrhic victory for Sweden, and this sort of attritional warfare became the prevailing theme of the War of Religions. Every single battle is more or less a one-for-one trade in manpower, with tens of thousands of my men dying each month for measly war score gains. In the first 2 years of war, about 500,000 soldiers lay dead, a grim toll that will only rise. Although on the bright side, Paradox decided to give me the Lion of the North achievement a bit prematurely for some mysterious reason. But you know what? I appreciate that vote of confidence. It's kind of like a bet on Polymarket, and I can only hope there's some insider trading going on here.
Yes! Come to Papa!
Unfortunately, my stocks take a bit of a tumble as the Hungarians show up in force to support the Catholic Brethren, beating back my armies and reversing some of the territorial gains in Germany. I also have to contend with hostile mercenaries popping up from thin air, besieging my capital, all the while guarding my coastline from British and Portuguese naval landings.
They're everywhere.
So now my attention is getting increasingly split among different theaters of war. The carnage continues unabated, as it seems like every nation in Europe wants to get in on the action, and is seemingly unbothered by the incalculable amount of blood and treasure that is being shoveled into the abyss. In the 4th year of war, my levies have recovered enough for me to summon up a second round of cannon fodder infantrymen that is desperately needed, as I am really struggling to fend off what seems to be the inexhaustible Catholic League.
Leave me alone!
By the end of 1607, I am forced to pull back the tattered remnants of the once grand army of Sweden. But all is not lost, as I am finally able to separate piece out Aragon in the hopes that France will now shift its attention eastward and save my meatball-loving country. However, the flip side of having your military decimated is that the manpower upkeep is drastically lowered because entire units are now gone, meaning that my standing army's reinforcement rate actually increases in the short term. This is where having a gigantic war chest comes in very handy when fighting forever wars in EU5. As long as I have the ducats, I can continuously reconstitute my standing army and even find the time to upgrade my cannons, as it seems Hungary and Bohemia are distracted by my vassals' territories. As I patiently wait for my delivery of fresh meat to accumulate, the war continues to attract new faces like Bulgaria, who shows up with a non-existent fighting force but serves as a nice punching bag for Hungary. I also finally see some baguette-munching troops marching in to relieve some of the pressure on me, which is greatly appreciated. My regular army has now consolidated to a single unit of 20,000 soldiers, which is strong enough to send out for a second round of bloodshed. The year is now 1609. 700,000 souls have been consumed by the raging inferno, and there seems to be no light at the end of this tunnel. But just as I resign myself to an eternity of warfare, Fate itself seemed to smile upon the Swedes.
I got you, homie.
The struggle has gone on for so long that the Bohemian Emperor dies of old age. At first, I didn't really think much of it, but then came a suspicious diplomatic pop-up that Bohemia suddenly wanted a white peace. I knew that I could do better and rejected their offer. And sure enough, Bohemia is now willing to accept their defeat in the War of Religions. I don't exactly know why Bohemia is finally caving into my demands. Perhaps it's because they're out of money, out of manpower, or maybe it's because they realize that the real war was the friends that we killed along the way. A suitably happy ending to a 6-year-long war that saw an entire continent set itself ablaze. From the utter garbage of Magnus IV to the ascendancy of the second Burger King, who now rises to become the first Lutheran emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. And so, Lutheranism ascends as the new imperial faith of the HRE, carried on the shoulders of Swedish power, a turning point in history, and a great day for IKEA enthusiasts everywhere. What a time to be alive. This Europa Universalis 5 campaign took me 272 years of in-game time and 75 hours of real-world time to complete. Since I didn't have that much experience with the game at first, I took things a little slower than I probably should have, and I had a bit too much fun reading all of the historical flavor pop-up texts. But we got it done in the end, and I'm very happy to see the Line of the North icon shining brightly in my unlocked achievements. Only 0.2% of players have unlocked it apparently as of my recording, so I'm pretty stoked about that. Thank you guys so much for watching. This EU5 campaign took a lot longer than I initially anticipated, but I got through it, and I honestly think I have a much better grasp of the mechanics now than at the start of my Sweden run. I've always really liked strategy games, but I was unsure if people wanted to watch gameplay of me changing the colors on a map, because I know that's not particularly visually exciting. However, I am hoping that my commentary and editing style brought some flavor to all the things that I was trying to do, and make the grand strategy experience more entertaining for more people. This is the first grand strategy game that I am posting on my channel, and if you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much. And consider subscribing to the channel, it would mean a lot to me. As always, I hope to see you all next time, but until then, goodbye for now.